and I'm speaking concerning the 6599. You don't have my testimony, but it is in the committee room, so it's available. I'm going to sort of skip around. I just want to first address the definition of gender identity in the bill. It looks like there's a number, it's one of the loosest definitions I think I've ever seen in literature up here. It doesn't give any time limit on how long. It doesn't say that the American Psychiatric Association says that this is a gender identity disorder. It doesn't say that you have to be diagnosed with this to do this. So I assume that it's sort of self-identity. Doesn't give a time period how long. If you can change it from day to day or week to week or whatever. So I think there's certainly some problems with that definition. As I mentioned, the American Psychiatric Association lists the criteria. They're in my testimony. I won't go through them. For diagnosis, the International Classification of Diseases also the same. Obviously, gender identity disorders are real. No doubt they are not easy to live with or to treat. We should condemn any persecution or bullying of people who have these disorders. Those who have these disorders deserve compassion and help, though. This bill would compel, however, this bill would compel all of society to accept this disordered sexual behavior as normal. I'm sure many women listening today are surprised to hear that men apparently are already using women's restrooms throughout the state. I think most women have an expectation of privacy, that there are no men present when they use the ladies' room, and apparently this is not the case. Does the same thing occur in changing rooms in department and other clothing stores? How will this affect locker rooms? In the schools, in the YMCA, the YWCA, in other gyms, in country clubs. The bill specifically mentions country clubs in particular. It would seem to give a person the legal right to enter the locker room of their choice. No doubt this will make its way into the public school sex education classes, where children will be taught that selecting their gender is normal. Rather than require people with a sickness to conform to society's sexual norms, this bill would require society to conform to the sickness. Though no one wants to discriminate against another person, when a person has a psychological illness, it is wrong to treat that person's behavior as normal. It is even more absurd to treat those who recognize the symptoms of the illness as though they were the ones who are sick, or even as criminals. This is a new area for me to get into, so I really have more questions than things I can give. I also just became familiar with the Human Rights and Opportunities section of it the other night. Just scanning it, it looks like there's a number of different penalties for discrimination, from $25 to $100 for some things, to $1,000 to $5,000, up to 30 days in jail, civil suits, and legal fees. For different various things. Though the bill does have a religious exemption, it does not apply to individuals, their businesses, or their children in public schools. The U.S. Department of State now allows a person to select which gender they want listed on their passport, which need not be the biological sex they were born with. If this bill becomes law, would the state follow the State Department, issuing DMV licenses based on a person's birth certificate or their chosen gender? How will that affect law enforcement identification when the All Points Bulletin goes out to look for a man or a woman, and they find on the DMV license that whichever gender it's going to be? Would this bill require changing the birth certificates? If a man chooses to be a woman, can he save on his life insurance rates? What about health insurance? Auto insurance? Auto insurance is specifically mentioned in the bill. I don't know if it applies to others, but it does mention state contractors. If a state contractor is a health insurer or life insurer, do they have to change their policies? How will this affect medical care? When an EMT shows up on scene, will he be told the person is male or female? It makes a big difference the way an EMT goes about his diagnosis. The Canadian military requires male soldiers who identify as women and women soldiers who identify as men to dress in a uniform of their target gender. Will this bill affect the Connecticut National Guard? This is not a bill that affects only a few people with a disorder. It affects the entire society, and it could disorder our entire society. Please vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Holder-Winfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How are you doing, Mr. O'Brien?
Good, thank you.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't know how it comes out, so bear with me. I actually just want to get an answer. I'm not quite sure what the opposition is. I know you have a lot of questions, but in all of that, I'm not quite sure what your opposition is. So if you could tell me in a very clear way what your opposition to the bill is, or is it just because you have all of these questions?
Well, in international law, though some are trying to contend there's all kinds of different genders, in international law it says the only international law that really is on the books is one that says that there are two genders, male and female. And I think that that's the way society should be ordered. And, according to the Psychiatric Association, anything else is a disorder. And I think that I've been coming up here for 40 years. I've seen things don't stand still. They go in one direction or the other. They don't stand still.
So I
think we're heading towards a sexless, genderless society. And I think that's very bad for society. It's very bad for the children. I'd say that this society is committing child abuse to our children.
And so you talked about the sickness that people have, and you referred to the American Psychiatric Association. I would imagine that you're talking about the section that deals with gender dysphoria and issues, mental issues deriving from that. And I had this conversation 2 years ago when we had the bill, and read off the section in which it talked about gender dysphoria and the issues stemming from that as issues deriving not from an issue, a mental issue necessarily resident in an individual, but issues that are become issues for the person because of the way they're treated. And so, yes, there may be this issue which would be a disorder, but it is not necessarily so. And I could pull it up if you would like and read it again. So my question to you is, did you read that whole section, and do you disagree with what I'm saying?
From what I have here, American Psychiatric Association permits a diagnosis of gender identity disorder based on 4 diagnostic criteria, and they're here. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, so that's why I skipped over it. Just put it in there for the members' benefit to know that there's something in there about that.
Right, and I appreciate that. I'm just suggesting that there's a whole section on what it actually is, not just how you get diagnosed, but what it is. And you put it forward as part of the reason why we shouldn't be doing this bill, so that's why I was asking you that. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and the criteria that are given here doesn't seem to mention other people's attitude towards the person that they're diagnosed.
You're talking about the criteria. I'm talking about the actual gender dysphoria and what it is. Not the criteria for diagnosing it, but what it is, and why, in particular with people who are cross-dressers, why they might experience gender dysphoria. And there's not just this little passage. There's a lot more about it in that book that you're talking about, not just that page that you have there. And that's what I was suggesting to you. So, thank you.
I'll try to learn more about it.
Are there other